Hi everyone, this is Adam Price.
And Emily Jane Akery.
And you're listening to the Relative Rhythms Podcast.
Today we're excited to introduce to you singer-songwriter and recording artist Hugh Trimble.
Hugh is one of my favorite songwriters and is the epitome of a modern-day troubadour. He has made a living for many years as a street performer, traveling from town to town and city to city, playing for strangers.
He has lived and performed in D.C., New York, Chicago, and is currently in the Nashville area, where he has reinvented his sound with his new group, the Atomic Ranch Band.
His lyrics are powerful and poetic, haunting and heartbreaking, yet hopeful, devastatingly beautiful, and full of vivid imagery. Pulling inspiration from the folk revival of the late 50s and 60s, his music and life seem to sit somewhere in between a Jack Kerouac novel, if it had more heart, and a Bob Dylan album, if Dylan had a better voice.
We talked to him about street performance, his songwriting process, the importance of music and dance in a culture that is busy but isolating, and the responsibility of an artist to a hurting world.
Please welcome to the podcast, Hugh Trimble. Hugh, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, it's so good to be here. Hi, Adam. Hi, Emily.
Usually we kind of open up the conversation by asking our guests how they first came to their art form and sort of decided to begin pursuing it as a career.
Let's see. Well, I went to undergraduate. I went to school. I always knew I wanted to be a performer, but I was very convinced for a very long time I wanted to be an actor. And still sometimes I wake up and wonder if that is, in fact, my calling. But yeah, so I went to school to start to study acting. And like any sort of young artists, I was just chomping at the bit to sort of create, and I think I got a little bit restless reading scripts, and I wanted to start writing my own. But I also love the format of a song, something about the idea of writing a screenplay, long format prose felt so daunting. So the idea of consolidating a feeling or a story into several minutes of music just was so appealing to me. I also, I think something about the restlessness of my young creative life brought me to songwriting. I liked how mobile music was. I chose an instrument that was literally quite easy to carry around. And Adam, you know this well. The deal was really sealed for me when I went to New York City and I went to Central Park and I put down my hat and I just got this wild hair to start singing for strangers. And the rest is history. I fell in love with performance, singing on a street corner for strangers, and the rest is history.
When did you pick up guitar?
Well, I started playing guitar. So my dad plays guitar. And so some of my earliest memories are playing chords with him. He got me a ukulele when I was quite young. Sort of my fingers started getting used to the fingerings and things when I was, 8-10 years old, something like that. But I started taking lessons and really learning to pick and things maybe in early middle school.
Do you remember the first song you ever wrote?
Some sort of school project in elementary school. I barely remember it, but I remember I remember thinking it was kind of the teachers were a little bewildered. I kind of came in very serious and I said, I have a song for you. And they're like, oh, okay.
That's awesome.
Everybody else was like drawing little pictures and stuff. But I remember it was a song about escaping in my imagination. I remember the theme of it was just, I could be anybody. And I think actually it's kind of related to your first question. I really think that Hugh has been thinking about sort of moving and traveling and escaping in song and imagination. But gosh, I must have been like in maybe 5th grade. Maybe it might have been middle school. Maybe it was 6th grade, but it was early.
Wow. So I have a question about your time on the street corner, if you will.
Yeah.
I know you kind of spent a lot of time as a street performer. Was there moments where you were just like, that's it, I'm going to throw in the hat, I'm all done? Or it was just the highs and the lows just kept you going?
More the latter. I've actually found myself more having those moments of discouragement or, you know what, I'm going to just hang it up as I move towards, how do I put this without, because I think that street performance and busking is an incredibly legitimate and beautiful and timeless art form that deserves all of our respect.
Yeah.
So I don't mean that when I started pursuing more legitimate professional pathways, but by that I mean recording studios and venues. And, that was when I really started to, there come those peaks and valleys of discouragement. But to be honest with you, I think that's really perceptive, Emily. Like when I was street performing, even the highs and the highs and lows all motivated me. And I think part of it was so much of that activity is about surrender. You can control what songs you're going to sing, but you can't predict the weather. You can't predict a passerby. So it's this constant state of both knowing your craft and coming prepared, and then just completely giving into the moment. And so I always found that really invigorating, and just people in general activate me and inspire me. So to be so constantly exposed to people was wonderful. When I started to really kind of curate, shape, maintain, and share, I don't know, a persona or a career in a little bit more structured or deliberate way, that's when I kind of I struggle a little bit more, I think.
I think there's so many more politics involved with that, concern about, am I presenting myself in the correct way for this venue or for this audience, that you don't have to worry as much on a street corner, because you can't, like you said, you can't predict who's coming. So you don't have to present to a certain audience because you can't predict it. So it's some freedom in that, I think.
Absolutely. And a lot of shape shifting as well. So I do think that it was a passion that was very suited to my 20s, in a time of my life when there was a lot of identity building and searching. The stage of street performance was great for me because I could try on different personas and personalities. I could really adapt and adjust. And then I guess as we get older, maybe this is across the board, or especially for artists, I'm not sure, but you end up having to start sleeping in the beds you make. And that becomes a different kind of journey altogether.
All of us, right?
Yeah, I suppose that is, yeah. But I think the anonymity is also what I'm hearing in that question. It was something I really grouped on. And my friends know very well what a technophobe I am and how anxious digital spaces can make me, and still do. But I'm learning to be a bit more flexible and a bit more grateful. But I think part of what makes me anxious in this era of digital artistry is things feel so documented. And what I love about performance in general is how fleeting it is. Whether you land that note, whether you're killing it or whether you're struggling, it just kind of, the current keeps moving, and there's something fleeting about all of it. And I love that about street performance. It's just always passing. That's why I actually, frankly, recording in studios can also be a little anxiety producing, because you have that pressure of like, oh, okay, this is locked in,
documented for eternity.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because Adam and I have had this conversation several times. Of, I've always, performing is what also invigorates me and brings me joy. And so I've always kind of considered myself a performer, but not an artist. Because I don't care as much about the creation as much as I enjoy showcasing other people's creations and sharing it with the world and giving that joy. And so I resonate with you saying that, that fleeting moment of like, you give it all and then it's past, and that's in some ways also provides a lot of freedom. I'm curious, do you ever feel like, because everything you share, you create, right? For the most part, do you feel that there's a difference there or no?
It's such a good and such a big question, because, as a street performer, which we've been talking about, the 95% of the songs one plays are covers by design, it's an opportunity to play these timeless songs that people know. I remember somebody describing street performances as going fishing. You bait your hook with a memory and you just cast it into the crowd. And
oh wow, I love that.
And so I love presenting and performing things that I didn't necessarily generate or create. But also, it's interesting that you make that distinction between a performer and an artist. I mean, I think that, because I think that there's artistry in performance, and I do, but I'm sorry, I'm kind of skirting your question a little bit. I do wear different hats when I'm presenting a song or composition that I have created. It is a different feeling. I have a different relationship with it than I do when I am interpreting somebody else's art and presenting it. Both of them present their freedoms and both of those present their challenges. I guess I can be a little bit more, I guess, be a little bit more anxious about something that I feel a little bit more responsible for something that I've created.
For
a
sure.
little bit more like a pressure to present it. You asked about the first song I ever wrote, and I think about a young Hugh, and that with the gift of retrospect and kind of see the patterns. And I've always, even as a young person, or especially as a young person, but to this day, get very, it's always a challenge when I have a vision and I can just see it, I can hear it, I know what it should be. And then, of course, it has to go through the mechanisms of my own abilities, which are lacking. Yeah. And so the thing that comes out just doesn't look like the thing or sound like the thing that was in my heart. And, whereas as an infant, I would just weep, because that's so frustrating. But as an adult on a creative journey, learning about the distance between the vision and the execution and coming and making peace with that, and even making friends with that, is part of the journey and part of the struggle. I've learned to start celebrating the accident or understanding my shortcomings and treating those shortcomings like allies instead of obstacles, but it's a little abstract. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that, but I believe it.
You have a lifetime, probably 5 lifetimes worth of stories from your time on the road and busking and stuff. I'm wondering, when you've been doing that, have you come across other artists on the street and collaborated with them in any way, or even like passersby? And how do you approach that impromptu collaboration?
I feel like it's interesting that I talk so much about busking when it actually has been quite a long time since I have busked. And, I have to, it's such an important part of my origins, but I also feel a little bit distant from the act itself. I've been more recently, I've been finding and playing these, 3 to 5 hour gigs where I just kick a tambourine and are just going through every song I've ever known, and then a couple, and it's bringing me back. But it's been a while since I put down my hat in a public space, and I've been wondering a little bit. I mean, do I have the stamina? What's changed? I think about even that the world has changed. I mean, it's our attitude towards serendipity and street performers as a culture has shifted as well. But yeah, these impromptu collaborations. I mean, I absolutely thrive on serendipity. In fact, if you ask me to prepare for something, I will get so anxious, because then you have the as you can probably tell by how I'm rambling right now, I have very little preparation. But no, because at the moment you start to plan, that it's a world of possibilities has to sort of narrow into a single road of decisions. And that's the thing that kind of makes me freaked out a little bit. So dealing with all the messiness and accidents of random encounters was absolutely what fueled me. And I think to a fault for a lot of my my younger life, I really do anything for a story. Because I do really crave I love to invent stories, but I also crave the authority. I don't know, like I want to earn a story that I tell. And so I go sort of hunting for them. And I think sometimes that's gotten me maybe a little sidetracked or maybe a little bit, irresponsible with trying to immerse myself in other people's stories and somehow appropriate them. That's kind of a different conversation, I guess. But when people sort of messily sort of stumble into my creative space, that's absolutely welcome. It's like sort of amoebas joining. Sort of suddenly we are like globbed together and creating this entire new thing. I've frequently said, wherever there are two, there is a third. When two things come together, there's this incredible third entity that is created. So that's collaboration in its purest. And when it finds me, I'm all about it, because then that takes some of the decision making out of my hands. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I love that imagery. I've never heard that analogy before about two things coming together. It creates, it almost like births in a way, this new thing that couldn't be recreated if it was tried to. I think some things Adam and I are really interested in is this idea of like collaboration. And so I'm a dancer and Adam's a musician. So we've talked about how our worlds used to be maybe closer than they are today, and what causes that and what separates it and what brings us together as art forms and as communities. And do you have any stories about that, about collaborating maybe within different art forms, or if you have worked with any dancers, or opportunities where you've witnessed or experienced two communities that maybe have been separated come back together?
Well, dance. That's wonderful to bring that up. As some of my fondest memories of street performing is inspiring people to dance. You know that it's such. I was at a. I don't know why this is coming. I was playing a gig in Harlem over the winter, and was playing a set of music. It was this wonderful eclectic space. And the band that come after me was a blues group, a couple old timers, and they were great. They were absolutely cooking. But the dance floor was empty, and my partner and I and her sister just decided to get up and start moving and being really silly with it. And I guess before we knew it, the place was full. You know, I guess the point I'm making is everybody is just on the brink of diving in, but we have so many inhibitions. So sometimes I feel that our role as artists is to give people permission to dive in. So anyway, when I was street performing, if somebody would start moving or dancing, and frankly, usually they're children, which is wonderful, you know, and then all of a sudden the space has permission to start participating. And it's both lovely and a little tragic that we're all kind of looking to each other being like, is this okay? Can I be here? Can I be a person right now? And our job sometimes is like, yes, in fact, go for it. We're here for it. But I remember, so in New York City, there, in Bethesda Fountain where I'd like to perform, there were a lot of weddings. And so to see brides and grooms and brides and grooms, start dancing, you know, while I was playing a sweet cover of, you know, Tina Turner or something like that. Or getting caught in a rainstorm and everybody just taking shelter in this little echoey tunnel where I'd play. And suddenly there was just a dance party and a tambourine. I mean, just really present human moments that, you know, people were wet and it was sticky and you know, there were kids laughing and it was loud. I keep coming back for some reason. I feel like I've said the word messy like several times, even just a couple minutes we've been talking. But I think that's what I love about it. And these sort of impromptu collaborations and multimedia is just, how unformed and organic it can feel. For as, you know, committed to my craft as I am and as many places as it's taken me, it's strange to note that I have always had such a resistance to real practice and study. I've always had, sometimes I think that the way I was able to, so I work a lot of a mosaic of jobs, and I've just started working a after or before school program with some kids. And, you know, they range from about 6 to 12 years old. And some of them come in with their, you know, little musical instruments. I can tell they're going to band practice after that and stuff. And so I've been talking to them and, you know, the common theme is like, oh yeah, I love to play the instrument, but I hate practicing my scales. And I'm like, I see you. I get that entirely. And sometimes I think that the reason I have been able to have such a lifelong love affair with music, frankly, is I've never treated it like an academic study. However, that has completely undermined my ability to I'm not the musician that I would like to be because I have not dedicated myself in that way. And sometimes, you know, that's not a very useful thought experiment. Although I guess I'm relatively young yet. I could, you know, actually start to take music seriously finally in my 30s. But I wonder what that ratio between, approaching music academically and really excelling in an art form, and then also keeping yourself sort of like ignorant and innocent or free enough to always still consider it play. And how do you find that balance? Yeah.
What you had mentioned before about when you're in spaces and the first ones to start moving are the kids, right? They don't have those inhibitions. They're not worried, what is somebody going to think of me, or do I look good doing this, right? It is play to them, and it's just innate response that they haven't learned that they have to control or hide yet, right? And so even being able to approach your art in that way of I don't have to hide, I don't have to worry, I can just create, and then maybe we worry later or something, but being able to do that, I think, is so hard as adults. It's so hard.
Yeah, I agree. And I know from, I mean, at least in my personal experience, academia has not helped that for me personally.
Mm,
And it's a good thing to think about because we're all educators here, how to
mm,
encourage growth without discouraging the play aspect of it.
Mm,
And your approach, Hugh, I think is really interesting because whether you realized it or not, just the amount of time spent on just like the streets in the subways cutting your teeth, just like whether you thought of it as practice or not, essentially that's what it was. You were just putting in a lot of time on your instrument and on your craft. It might be slower than, sitting in a practice room practicing a scale, but it's still practice, and being able to grow in that way without losing the play aspect
hmm
is really awesome.
Yeah, I suppose grass is always greener in someone else's yard. I see something that's interesting about busking too is I feel that well, it was very just deeply helpful. I look to a lot of the lessons I learned um, busking just when it comes to just interacting with people in general. You learn a lot about human nature when you watch people give, how they
hmm
give, when they give, if they give,
Mm,
what moves them. And even the kind of sticky, here's a word again, messy moments, that you have with people really are helpful. But so in some ways, I learned a lot of nuance and continue to. But when it comes to dynamics, and I'm speaking literally with regard to music, I feel like in the last decade, when have I had to sort of relearn that, oh no, I don't need to shout to be heard.
mm,
In fact, now I can start experimenting with whispers. And I mean that sonically, actual decibels and dynamics and the arrangement of a song, but also lyrically. Can
mm,
I be subtle here? Or when, because something I struggle with is, and a loving critique I'm given quite often by people who know me is like, Hugh, you just spent the last 15 minutes saying something you could have probably said in 30 seconds. Like, lock it up, buddy.
No.
And I feel the same way about my art and my songwriting. Sometimes, like, just say the thing, man. But then sometimes, like, no. Let's go on a let's look around this thing. And so I think part of my journey the last decade has almost been unlearning some of the things that I maybe learned in subway platforms. When is it all right to? Because then you're really kind of demanding attention. You have to earn your
hmm
place there in a chaotic environment, as opposed to. And I wonder what this means to you guys as artists. When do you encourage somebody to lean in closer? And sometimes
right.
withholding becomes a very strong tactic as a poet or as a player or as a dancer. Subtle movements. And so I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been trying to look at what subtlety means and when it's important and when it's also avoidant. Because sometimes I'll wax poetic because I'm a little afraid to say the thing, or
Mm.
sometimes I think it's the more thorough way to
hmm
investigate that thing I'm trying to say. But wow, here, I'm doing it right now.
Interesting.
No, I was gonna say you're so poetic with your lyrics in such a beautiful way that Adam and I have been listening through your songs, and I'll look at him and be like, "What the heck? What is this about?" In like a good way, in a challenging way, in a way that I'm not saying to get to the point, because maybe I don't understand what your point is, and that's okay. Trying to understand what it means for me is okay. And Adam knows this very well. I don't like not knowing. I like to know. I would like you to give me the answer on a sheet, you know? So it's good to have moments where you don't get what you want all the time.
Mhm.
That's good for us, whether
Oh,
we
that's
like it or not.
interesting. So something is a little vague or requires, I don't know, bringing yourself I guess the act of interpretation, which means
Yeah.
bringing yourself to the piece of art. Then that's
Right.
that can be an act of service because people are like, oh, you mean I have to get involved in this song?
Mm.
Man,
Yes.
I didn't want
Yes.
that. I just
Yeah.
wanted to get the kind of DoorDash, like
Right.
song delivered
Exactly.
to me.
Yeah. Well, especially in today's society, right?
Mm-hmm.
That immediate gratification, immediately knowing, not having to work for the answer. You can just Google it. Like if I could just Google, what does this mean? Then it's way easier than me having to try to find the answer. Listen to it again, like.
I also acknowledge that in this day and age, and I spent too much time sort of shaking my fist at the kids these days or whatever. I mean, it's just, it's not useful to kind of be like, to really just critique, the paradigm constantly. I mean, we have to move within it. And I understand that there's so much noise and so much content, and our days are so fast paced, and it's none of our faults, even though we are all completely involved in it. But asking somebody to have the patience and the quiet and the stillness and frankly the time to engage with something that's meaningful for me, like I understand that's a big ask, and again, in my more petty moments, I'm like, come on, you can spare 4 minutes for a song. But frankly, sometimes I can't, I mean, we're not encouraged to do that. I move through my days pretty breathless often and anxious. And so asking people to take a moment, and when I get the feedback from people about my lyrics, or that just show that they have not just listened, but listened to a song, nothing is more gratifying. Because I realize just how hard and rare and how difficult that can be in this day and age. So I have a lot of love for it. And but I also, as a writer, I oftentimes will sit down and I say, okay, I would really like to write a song about this thing because this is important to me. This means something, or I experienced this thing. And then how frustrating when the words on the page just start drifting off in another direction. And oftentimes it's just like a dog who won't, go where you want it to. And so often I just say, okay, I guess I'm being taken for a walk by my song now, as opposed to the other way around. And I would love the discipline in the craft a little bit. I know that just kind of to rein it in. Sometimes I think I let myself drift, because often, Emily, I will listen to one of my own songs and say, what the heck was I talking about? What is... What's that? And maybe I shouldn't reveal that, but it's lovely because, especially as I get older, I'll re-engage with some lyrics that I wrote 10, 15 years ago. And it'll be kind of a little bit like a letter that I wrote to myself across time. And it would mean something very different. So the ambiguity of my poetry is important for me personally, because I continue to learn from it. And there are many Hughs inside of me. I think it's as there are Adams and Emilys. I'm not a single autonomous, coherent thing. I shift and change, and I'm inconsistent. So to let different parts of me speak to each other, sometimes in language that I don't understand, is helpful to me. But how much do I expect other people to be in on my own weird little therapeutic journey, right? Like it's, at some point I do have to consider other people listening to my songs.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of goes back a little bit to what you were saying about a rainstorm or people dancing to your music. Just our world is so fast paced, and when something snaps you out of this constant rat race, whether it be a rainstorm or a somewhat ambiguous lyric that makes you stop and listen more intensely, there's something very human about reconnecting with the present and those around you. That can be very powerful.
I so often think that is so much of our roles as performers and artists, is to usher people back into a present space. And I think it's the reason I think it's no accident that theater was my road into this, because I loved in acting spaces this idea of you are reacting, not acting. That the accident, that the present. I mean, the goal is to be as spontaneous and authentic as possible within the confines of a script or choreography or whatever it is, which is a very interesting paradox. But how to bring that into our lives is to surprise people. If somebody is startled or surprised, or exactly as you just said beautifully, Adam, something very true and unself-conscious emerges. And that's what I love, when you see the spark of something that somebody didn't have the opportunity to prepare for. It's not that we have to keep people suspended in a state of anxiety. I think we can also reassure as artists, but I do like bringing people back. And that's why, yeah, and I do think we're swimming upstream a lot. So much of our life is so curated, from our, our diets to our dating lives to our media content to everything. I mean, we can plan, prepare, vet. It doesn't leave a lot of room for accidents. However, accidents have a way of finding us, I suppose, and that's part of being a human being. But yeah, I don't know. If I suddenly go radio silent, which is not out of the question, I think I'll just go back to Bethesda Fountain and sit in that tunnel and sing my songs and call it a day. I mean, I really think that that's just, that's the level of presence that I still aspire to. And I'm trying to figure out how to keep that alive in my life as an artist while still, I don't know, participating as a modern human. I don't want to just, I don't want to just be that weird curmudgeon, hermit. But sometimes I feel like it's the only option. I don't know.
Get up, kiss me with your hair down. You're lit up, you got your monkey suit on. And you know God loves a dreamer. Oh, my love. Oh,
This is the Relative Rhythms podcast, and you're listening to our conversation with Hugh Trimble. This podcast is a labor of love, and we're currently funded solely by our listeners. If you'd like to support our work, you can do so by joining our Patreon, where you can find extra content and listen to the full, uncut interviews. Go to patreon.com/relativerhythms to subscribe and support our work. You can also support us by following us and leaving us a review wherever you are listening. And you can find us on all the socials at Relative Rhythms. Thanks for tuning in, and now back to our conversation with Hugh. We've been speaking about lyrics a lot, and I think you are just an amazing lyricist and an amazing storyteller as well. A lot of your lyrics center around very biblical imagery, which is interesting because a lot of it also centers around themes that are, I don't want to say like blasphemous, but like bucks the trend of mainstream like conservative theology or philosophy very much in a beautiful way that I really enjoy. I also just heard recently that in your acting days, one of your final projects, you decided to play the role of Judas. And so I'm wondering just tell me what's happening.
What's going on there? Yeah. No. And I want to say,
what is happening?
I feel a little emotional right now. It like I was saying earlier, just to feel seen and that you are sort of engaging on the level of lyrics, it just means the world. So thank you so much for asking that question, because it is deeply personal. And I really, I have a deep desire to talk about it. Sometimes I feel like being a songwriter is a little bit like, not exactly a cry for help. That's not exactly what I mean, but sort of like, hey guys, I got this thing I need to get off my chest, and then so often the world, especially in a place like Nashville, is like, oh great, when do the drums drop? Or it's like, how's the hook going to fit into this?
Right.
Like, no, wait a second. I'm talking about Judas Iscariot. They're like, what? But no, it's a good question. I mean, I was raised certainly not evangelical, but within the sort of cultural and familial context of Christianity. My grandfather, after whom I'm named, was an Episcopal minister, and the stories of the Hebrew and Christian Bible are just very much part of my origin stories. But on the level of myths, in the same way, I mean, I'd love to talk about sort of my own faith journey, but it almost feels like tangential to this. I mean, they just simply are we tell stories to make sense of a very ambiguous experience of human existence. And so I look to creation stories. I look to stories that seek to answer the questions about why we struggle, why we love, why we're compelled to do what we do, why there's violence, why, and of course, I mean, the stories that I encountered as a young person that begin to address those questions, in my context, were Judeo-Christian. But I have to, and I love that you said that there is some heresy and blasphemy in there, because while I do consider myself a person of faith, although I have trouble sort of aligning with a single institution, I don't want to fall back necessarily on the cliche of I'm spiritual, not religious, because, I attend church and like it's a little more complicated than that. But I do, I find more connection to these mysterious and miraculous currents. That sort of, I love to celebrate the mystery as opposed to try to sort of answer the questions. But I find most connection and most direction and belonging and inspiration when I begin to find the humanity in my idols and my gods, my heroes, as opposed to distancing myself from their experience, or sort of to abstract or elevate. So I think maybe what you're talking about a little bit, one of my favorite things to do is to gesture towards a very familiar story like Genesis, like Adam and Eve, like the Passion, like crucifixion, whatever it may be. But then to like get messy with it, it's suddenly there are, there's that word again. You guys are bringing out this messy word in me, that it's not immaculate, that it's not distant and sanitized, that these are stories that come from the sort of bleeding, pulpy mess of the human experience. And frankly, I feel closer to the divine or the sacred when I think of the heroes of these stories and our idols as people who were fallible, whether they are abstractions or literal. Like, it's not even a question I'm seeking to ask. And you mentioned Judas Iscariot. I remember as a young kid, one of the most profound scriptural experiences I had as a young person was listening to Andrew Lloyd Webber's Jesus Christ Superstar on my parents' vinyl. And, that's very much a story. Yeah. I mean, obviously you got Jesus Christ Superstar, but I mean, that I feel very deeply that is Judas's story. He opens with the song and just the conflict this man was dealing with, sort of to love and betray and to be part of something that is larger than you, but to have to betray yourself and others and the violence of it and the love. I'm like, holy moly, that is like, I can relate to that. That's painful and it's challenging. And I remember just weeping, in Judas's, suicide scene when he just can't live anymore. Just as a kid, just being totally wrecked by that. And I've always been fascinated by that. And so, I just recently released a song called Caesar's Due, which the line itself is, there's nothing wrong with a hole in your palm, but let your money and your troubles fall through. And I have, I've been working with a friend and a manager recently, and we had this question. It was like, is this a Christian song? Like, are people? And I never know, because I live in Kentucky now, and I don't mean to make broad generalizations about the culture I find myself in, but we're deep in sort of Bible Belt country here. When I play a gig here, I honestly never know. Am I going to offend people, or am I going to really to appeal to their sort of spiritual sensibilities? And frankly, I don't know. I think I've yet to really piss anybody off, but it gets close, talking about because weaving our own stories in with these sort of immaculate or sacred stories can feel dangerous, because there's a lot of hubris and how dare you talk about sex or drugs or addiction or anything as it relates to, the story of Jesus Christ. And I'm just said, bring it on. If we can recognize the sacred in ourselves, then that's the point, as opposed to recognizing our distance from the sacred. I think that's more inspiring. For better or for worse, these stories are recognizable, and returning to this conversation about a busker, what are the stories that will resonate? Not exactly universally. I mean, we don't live in a, we don't have a monopoly on spiritual stories by any means. But, if I say Adam and Eve, chances are a lot of my audience will have associations immediately. And that becomes just raw material to work with, And oftentimes those associations are deeply traumatic and problematic. Sometimes they're really inspiring, but to just sort of start with a really potent image that means something to a lot of people, and then as an artist be like, okay, so I just shook a snow globe up. Now what do we do with it? So a lot of my work these days is taking me into service and sort of being a person among people, and how do we use our art and our gifts to be of service. And sometimes I grow very, very, very frustrated with institutions of religion who have lofty ethical and spiritual ideals, and in practice maybe fall short of them. So I'm much more interested in a practical, messy theology. If we can take these stories and have it inspire good acts, genuine community and compassion and selflessness. So I have very little patience for sort of spiritual virtue signaling, but a lot of love for the imperfect journey of trying to sort of access those values.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah. Preach, man.
It makes me, Adam and I both also grew up in a Christian home, and so, I'm getting like imagery as you're talking. I'm a very visual person. And so as you're speaking, I keep coming back to this, which you mentioned at the beginning about your busking journey as like fishing, right? So I keep coming back to this like fishing imagery, which is also a lot of times associated with Christian theology, and this idea of, you're putting something out there that people will recognize. I recognize this worm wiggling on this hook, and I'm going to go for it. And then where does that journey from my comfort zone in this deep blue sea to wherever you're taking me on this fishing pole? Like, where is this going? And that not knowing is the journey, right? That getting out of those places of like, this is the Adam and Eve story, and this is exactly how it goes. And it's, just in my kid's child, Bible, and just being shaken is beautiful.
And there's
or traumatic, right?
Right.
Or traumatic.
It's whatever it is, it's potent,
Yeah.
And I do think it requires some responsibility. Culture and cultural experiences were very important and prioritized in my family growing up, and I feel so grateful for that. And there was a lot of really rich conversations about art and religion and stuff in my family. There are also generational gaps, and it's not that we struggle to connect, but sometimes over the years, there's been some clunky moments of trying to sort of share something that's meaningful to me and then having it sort of be a little bit of a disconnect. I remember one example is showing my parents, I can't even remember the actual, it was a comedian, a stand-up special. Hilarious, wonderful, but the comedian does this thing where in the final moments of their set, it shifts tone profoundly and becomes really raw and accusatory and vulnerable. They're talking about some experiences. So, and I remember my mother being like really upset. And the point she made, and I've been thinking about it a lot, was like, this took me in, made me feel safe, and invited me in with my associations, and then sort of did this bait and switch, where it suddenly became something different, and where that's I think it's a really interesting note, and I want to be careful of that, but also not throw it out either. Like, to challenge expectations is part of what we do, but also not just using a currency of betrayal, right? I always want to my priority is to make people feel welcome, not to spoon feed or like necessarily, use high fructose corn syrup in my lyrics, but I also don't want to constantly be unsettling. I don't think that's my job or my goal either. So I do want, exactly. It's been a little clunky because sometimes I think I failed in that. I'd be like, hey, this familiar, lovely story you might remember from your childhood. Nope, it's something else entirely. And now I'm going to give you nightmares, So I don't want to do that. But sometimes I do kind of want to do that at the same time, There's a song coming out in my new EP that's very much Adam and Eve. It's called Robin and Sam. But these two kids get kicked out of their garden home, and the first line is Robin and Sam making love in the van. It's not exactly the way we want to picture Adam and Eve, leaving the garden, these sort of hippies in the van, making a mess of things. But I don't know. I find a lot of myself in maybe a little bit less reverent interpretations of stories.
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful things about songwriting is that, like you were saying about your own earlier songs, with a good song and well written lyrics, they can mean different things to different people, and even different things to the same person, depending when you're listening to it in within your life experience. And I think that's really powerful, and a signal of a really well written song. Also, this is good news for you, because if anyone does get offended by listening to your music, you can tell that they're actually listening to your lyrics. So you can take it as a compliment.
Either way.
I'm perpetually afraid of indifference. That's the only thing I don't want. Like, love it or hate it, just engage and bring yourself to it.
I think this is kind of veering off maybe a little bit, but one of the things you had said earlier was about community. You felt like culture and community, this is something that you grew up learning was important, and you enjoy the community that, like, you're busking, and that the community of people immediately in front of you shares in that moment. And I think that's something that both music and dance were built and grown and enjoyed and shared in community that has, at least like from a dancer's perspective, right? It was done within family homes, and now it's done in the studio setting, right? It's very like, I don't know, hospital feeling in some ways. I don't know if that's the right word, but sanitary, right? Very sanitary. And this is the way it's done, as opposed to when you do something with your family. A lot of times it's like, I roll out in sweatpants and like, I don't care what I look like, because it's my family, right? And so
very, very academic instead of messy.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Getting back to the messy. I wonder how you feel like in this kind of digital world where our communities are so huge, how you feel like your art and music and storytelling, or how we maybe can interact in a way that can be more immediate, communal, and raw and messy. And that's hard. I don't know if I really asked a question there, but
it's so hard. I more often than not, I feel that my participation or identity as a, I guess, consumer of digital products, or just existing in those spaces, is just absolutely in contradiction to, and sometimes in conflict with my, well, I'm trying not to be too dramatic. I'm about to say my humanity. No, that's not true. But my creativity, certainly my spirituality, and frankly my community life, which is hard and slippery because, and I'm just going to kind of lean into it, this sort of Luddite technophobe identity, even though it's much more nuanced. I don't mean to be so black and white, but, proponents of the internet and digital spaces really talk about how it facilitates community, and how it facilitates connection. And I see, validation in that. I don't want to just say the answer is like, put down your screens and get out in the world, because there's something very ableist about that as well. I mean, gosh, you guys, we're in how many different time zones and states right now? And here we are, like, having a conversation about art. If I was really, practicing what I preached, I'd be against this, and I'm not. This is healthy and lovely and community building. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but so often I do feel that being open to accidents and discomfort. Now, I love working with kids. I just love working with kids. And it's a little tangent. When you're talking about, when you were talking about art and music being sort of origins of community, I also think those are origins of learning. I mean, what are some of the first things we do with an infant, is mirroring, and what is that but dance and choreography, like mimicking and miming, vocalizing, sharing music. Like, so even though it's not academic, it's still deeply learning. And, to engage in a process of learning, or to open ourselves up to the idea that movement and song are always teachable moments, But if we approach that, it means that if anybody's being taught something, it means they have to admit they don't know it. So there's always like a little bit of vulnerability, which is also wonderful, you know? So it becomes a kind of deconstruction. I think we're all of us sort of expected, or we feel like we're expected to be sort of experts or to come out rehearsed or know what we're talking about. And maybe it goes back to this conversation about everything being documented. I'm always so scared of saying the wrong thing, you know? I'm always so, because then it's out there, you know? I mean, and so this, we don't leave space to be wrong. We don't leave space to admit ignorance and to move forward with it, you know? And so being a little bit less like allergic or a little bit less afraid of doing, being, or saying the wrong thing. And how do we begin to do that? I don't know, but I do know that my cell phone and my screens do not encourage that in me. In fact, the opposite. They make me constantly worried that I am falling short of some really abstract expectation that might just exist in my own head. But it exacerbates a lot of mental health issues for me. So my answer is finding present in-person human moments. Even if it's not, frankly, I'd rather be, you know, even if it's uncomfortable or like I'm rolling with somebody that I don't know very well, or like, you know, I'd rather have an imperfect in-person moment than like a really, you know, sanitized, curated digital one. Now that philosophy has led me to, I'm so grateful for people like Adam and my friends who've basically had to like hunt me down over the years. Cause I go through long chapters of my life where I just like completely like maybe dive a little bit too much into that and forget that I have long life. Yeah. And so I think I need to find some balance. I simply don't know. I really wish there was a way to be a professional artist, and perhaps there is, and perhaps it'll take some courage and some creative thinking, but to not necessarily give in to the algorithmic, competitive, anxiety-producing systems that we just feel are so mandatory, and frankly are professionally a little bit right now. If you want to monetize, if you want to support yourself, I mean, you got to have an Instagram, a TikTok, all these kind of things. Although I do not have TikTok, and I'm very poor at maintaining my socials. But I don't think that undermines my credibility. Well, it may undermine my credibility, but I don't think it undermines my integrity. But integrity does not translate to success. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah,
that's true. We all know that.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, that's been well documented over the decades. For sure.
We've been kind of like touching on it throughout. I know anxiety is something that a lot of us feel these days, and a lot of artists feel throughout their life. The fear of putting out something that's not great. How do you move through that as an artist? Like, how are you doing with any like imposter syndrome or anything like that? And how do you move through that as an artist? I'm asking for me because I need to know.
And I was about to turn around and be like, if you know, please let me know, because I don't know. I mean, obviously I'm moving through it in some, I'm still here. I'm still putting out music. But I definitely feel, I remember I had a birthday party when I was in, you know, 6th or 7th grade, and it was at a go-kart track. And I remember the operator for the go-karts kept having to pull me over because I was both pressing the acceleration and the brake at the same time. And he was like, kid, you got to pick one, right? You can't, that's going to destroy the motor. And I feel that way about my sharing and my imposter syndrome and all that kind of stuff. Like I'm perpetually pressing the brake and the gas at the same time. And it does burn up a lot of my engine, to be honest with you. And I don't know how to move through it. Something I struggle with the most is maybe a little bit less belief in myself. Like I think like any artist is a really weird mix of like the most insecure and the most egotistical person ever. I mean, the very fact that I stood on a New York City street and was like, everybody listen to me, right, you know, shows that I'm not, you know, I have some hubris, and that's important. And I'm grateful that, you know, I'm my own cheerleader sometimes. But I also really struggle with the like, why does what I have to say matter at all? Especially, you know, when we talk about social media, with everything that's happening in the world, globally and locally, sometimes when I like get around to promoting a new song or telling people to tune in and care about what it is I'm doing, I'm like, you don't need to, there's more important stuff to be using this platform for, so that's what I've been struggling with a lot too. And like, I don't think that's necessarily needs to be dismissed. I do think that we need to be responsible stewards of these digital spaces and of our own sort of voice and platform, but also we are not responsible. We are not like the spokesmen for the world either. And like at the end of the day, the only people we are sort of qualified to advocate for in a, truly or thoroughly, is ourselves. So we do need, we got to let ourselves off the hook and, not take on, I don't know. To be honest with you, I'm treading water here because like I'm sitting on material that I recorded a year ago that I have not been able to release, partly because I'm like, why should anybody care, And that's sad a little bit. And that represents more my insecurity. And I do not, if there are any young artists out there, this is not, in fact, I think we should be giving ourselves a lot more grace and a lot more permission to be ourselves. And something that helps me is I really, really hope that my songs can be an act of service, that my identity as an artist and a performer is not just self-indulgent, that it's not just about my personal therapy, but that's something about speaking my experience and turning my love for people and my messy human experience into these little bite-sized things like somehow can help. I don't always believe that, but that's like a little, I don't always know if I call it a mantra or prayer or a intention or whatever. But these days when I'm feeling nervous before sharing something online or playing a show, I'll just say a little thing like, hey, if this can help somebody tonight, like, please, 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 take away everything that stand, all my insecurities that muddy it up because, I have a chance to like show up and make somebody feel seen or heard. And I really hope that's the case. And the beautiful thing is we don't have access to the ripples that, our songs very well could help people. And it doesn't, even if you don't know it. I've had experiences where years later, somebody will say, hey, remember that show you played back in Brooklyn? And I'll be like, no. And they'll be like, well, that really meant a lot to me. I was like, I had no idea. That's wonderful. So to be open to the possibility that we are not just polluting the world with ourselves, it ends up coming back around to our own relationship with ourselves. Like I'm not just taking up space. I'm not making the world a worse place. I'm open to the possibility that this is my calling and I'm contributing something beautiful. But it's hard because I will keep myself from sharing because of those insecurities.
I think that's a very human. We say it's artists struggle with that, which is true. I think maybe more so than others, but it's a very human reality, right? To question in our lives, in our careers, in our relationships, in our friendships. Do we matter? Are we just taking up the space or are we creating positive impacts? And, the sad thing is some people don't have the opportunity to know that they are and that they do. And so I think it's important to share that our struggles with it because everybody struggles with it. And for the people who struggle with it and don't come out on the other side is, I think, just always sharing is something that we can maybe in a tiny way help, like you said, somebody you might not never know years later, maybe, but it's really important.
Something that has been helpful for me as just a personal practice is to remember to behave locally as an artist. I get most discouraged, I feel most despair and futility when I try to share in these large, ambiguous, vast digital spaces. And that the feeling of insignificance or, all those bad feelings kick up there. But, I play pretty consistently, at a local nursing home and, I moved in like communities of unhoused artists and like take a guitar out to like a homeless camp. Or there's something called a memory cafe at my local library where people with, early onset Alzheimer's dementia come in and like just do it and just seeing how immediately sharing a guitar and songs or encouraging other people to do the same, like has just to be able to see the impact, because so often we're allowed to abstract, what the impact, like who's listening to this, where are they, what must they be thinking about this experience, and just to give ourselves the gift to remind ourselves that no, this is the currency of what we do is human and it's present. So let's go out and do human and present things in balance. I'm not saying that I will necessarily delete my Instagram and never release some music on Spotify again, although maybe that's the case. No, but to balance that with more, I don't know, maybe slightly more invisible or local acts of creativity that are very nourishing, and they help to balance out those more corrosive or negative thoughts that I have. Which is a pretty selfish reason to, go out and be of service in your community, but whatever. You can do the right thing for wrong reasons. That's okay.
Well, doing the right things for two right reasons.
Two rights make a left. No.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think that if you know something's good for your mental health, it makes it selfish.
I was just having this conversation with a buddy right before I signed on with you guys, that we so often confuse self-love with selfishness. And that's so sad, because self-love is absolutely not selfish, and self-care is an important thing to do.
Thank you so much, Hugh. That was awesome.
Thank you so much, guys. This has meant the world to me. Thank you for making me feel seen and held and in community with you guys today. This has been really nourishing. You guys are awesome.
Robin and Sam making love in the van. They're escaping. Lambs on the lamb with a map and a family that they're making. They drive through the sand to the end of the land, and they name it. If we give back, we may make it. Who told you to fake it? Who told you to stay? Who told you you were naked? It was a mistake, it's okay.
You've been listening to our conversation with Hugh Trimble. You can find out more about Hugh, his music, and his touring schedule on his website, atomicranchband.com, or on the socials at Atomic Ranch Band. You can listen to his large catalog of original music on all of the streaming platforms.
If you liked our conversation today, please follow us and leave us a review. And if you'd like to support our work, check out our Patreon. Don't forget to follow us on all the socials at Relative Rhythms, and feel free to send us a message through our website, relativerhythms.com.
Our opening theme for The Love of It was composed by Adam. Our mid-roll music today was Kontiki, a secret unreleased track by Hugh, coming out very soon. Our outro music is Robin and Sam by Hugh Trimble and the Atomic Ranch Band, off of their soon-to-be-released EP, For the Garden, coming out July 19th. Be sure to check it out.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll leave you with Hugh Trimble and the Atomic Ranch Band.
Robin and Sam and a baby and half of an ending. Outside the van, the trees passing in a standing ovation. There's a gate in the back, they slip back through the cracks into Eden. If we give it back,